Thank you for attending day 2 of the Tech and Learning Virtual Leadership Summit. A special thank you to our sponsors, Guide 12, now Forecast 5 Analytics, Mediasite, Prezi, Noriva, and Boxlight. I'd like to remind everyone to log into the Conference Hub using the link sent in your confirmation email. Once logged in, you can visit a sponsor booth and Zoom meeting room to learn about their offerings and to book one-on-one meetings. Each visit to a sponsor Zoom room earns you 20 entries to our Passport to Prizes. We'll announce winners via email at the end of the conference. You'll also have the opportunity to see your personalized agenda, network with today's attendees, and access all conference resources in the download section. Before we begin, I'd like to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have any questions from our presenters during the session, please submit them through the Zoom chat feature. Please know we capture all questions and our presenters are happy to answer them as time permits. Today's slides and additional resource materials are available and may be accessed within the Downloads tab of the Conference Hub. We encourage you to download any resources and/or links that you may find useful. Be sure to use the conference hashtag TLTechLive in any of your social posts. Our next session is sponsored by Mediasite. Before I introduce our moderator and panelists, let's take a brief look at this video.
Mediasite helps harness the power of video to educate, communicate, and collaborate more effectively. Find out why thousands of the world's top universities trust Mediasite to revolutionize how they capture, engage with, and manage their video.
Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Christine Weiser from Tech and Learning.
Thank you, Navi, and welcome everybody. Super excited to have this conversation about distance learning tools. Good to see everybody. So as Navi said, please put your questions in the chat. We'd love to hear kind of what are some tools you're using, how are you rolling them out, etc. So, and as questions come up throughout the session, please add them to the chat and we'll certainly get to them. So I'm very happy to have with us today Martin Cisneros, who's the Director of Technology for the Berryessa Union School District, and Elizabeth Collins, who's Senior Vice President for North America for Sonic Foundry, also known as Mediasite. So I think we'll kick things off with Martin. So Martin, if you'd like to take it away. Oh, and you're muted, Martin.
Of course, I just wanted to make sure you guys understood how to read lips.
You're paying attention.
It's part of the engagement component of this, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're at in this wonderful place. Quickly, just, we're all going through this, is how are we going to engage our students with, we already had what I call the Costco run between March and now, where we're able to sample different things. And one thing we found out from a lot of our folks is that it was very, very difficult for us to really, keep our students' attention, right? What was the engagement? Because we all learn how to Zoom, we all learn how to do that, but our students, back in February, the way they skipped school was not showing up at school, and the way they skip school now is by turning off their microphone and their screen, right? So the question that becomes is like, what are some distance learning tools? What are some strategies? What are some learning hacks that many of the successful teachers who are doing this, what are they? How do they provide it? So I wanted to briefly speak to you about a few things that have been working. I am the Director of Technology here for the Berryessa Union School District, but for the past 14 years, I've been working with the different county offices of education here in the state of California. I work for, Q Computer Using Educators, ISTE, and a lot of these other organizations that, we provide professional learning for a variety of K-12 educators. And the feedback that we've been getting quite a bit there are some certain things that have been happening that have really, really helped, specifically for those teachers who are just coming on board. The ones, right? The ones that were not sure whether or not they wanted to taste the EdTech water. And now because of COVID, they now have to drink in a way. So what I briefly wanted to share with you is, when I think about how we need to learn, this is just, I think about learning hacks, right? And I think about that, this is the time that we need to provide agency for all of our students, right? Whether they're in high school, middle school, or elementary. An agency is basically the ability for students to display their own mindset, right? For them to own their own learning. And you're seeing a lot of that between the synchronous and the asynchronous component. So I strongly believe this because, like the rest of us, right? Once you understand how you learn, you're going to be able to modify your learning. But what are some of those tools that will help you along the way? So I'm going to give you some examples here, right? And when this first came out, literally the first week, I jumped on board. We started doing webinars for our teachers. We started doing webinars for our para-educators. We started doing webinars for our parents. And I started teaching them how to learn. How do you learn in 2020? Right? So I'm gonna give you some examples. So these are some scaffolds, some hooks, some what I call some learning hacks that I learned along the way. So let me make sure that I am, well, you can tell me whether or not you can hear this, right? So let's, for me, a lot of us use YouTube.
Lung trouble can come from the air you breathe at work, but thanks to the American Lung Association, you can breathe a little easier. They're working to fight all this lung disease. Your lungs are a miracle. Take care.
Y'all remember this wonderful guy, right? When I was a kid, he used to have all the cool commercials. I don't know about you, but I can barely understand him now. And that's the way a lot of our students, sometimes hear us as educators. And as we were telling more and more.
Lung trouble can come from the air you breathe at work, but thanks
to use video, how about teaching the kids how to use some certain hacks? For example, on YouTube, if you go down to settings, you can turn down the playback speed quite a bit to 0.75%. Or if you are a fluent reader, you can then, listener, you can also speed it up. But look what happens when I hit at 0.75.
Thanks to the American Lung Association, you can breathe a little easier. They're working to fight all this lung disease. Your lungs are a miracle.
What? It makes sense, right? It makes sense. We can slow them down. So these are what I call teaching hacks along the way, using a variety of different tools that teachers are using. Another one that I know many teachers are using at the current moment is they're using a lot of Google apps, right? Especially with slides. So on my left-hand side, what you're seeing on the screen is a Google slide. If I hover over here and I click on closed captionings, now, as I begin to speak, you can now see the closed captionings happening on top of my presentation. What? Yes, that's right, ladies and gentlemen, because research shows that if you have closed captioning, most of the time, between 20 to 30%, your audience will be able to understand or remember the concept a lot more because you're now giving different modalities. You're now listening to me. You're now looking at my slide deck. And at the same time, you're now reading at the very, very top. These are all wonderful hacks. These are all wonderful tools that, most teachers are using already, but just teaching your students how to use this, teaching your parents, which is now the third teacher, right, in the classroom. Before it used to be our classroom, now the third teacher is our parents. And one of the biggest skill sets that I believe all teachers should really know how, or really hone in, especially during this time, is the ability to screencast, right? The ability for you to record something that that can be viewed later, because video is a very powerful tool. Most of you are probably thinking, oh, good Lord, right? What kind of coffee did this guy drink? He's speaking so fast. And this is just my excitement. But sometimes as teachers, we get excited and our students are like, what was that he just finished saying? Right. So I always tell people, give your students the ability to rewind you. Give your parents the ability to rewind you. Teach them, all these hacks. So one of the first things I always tell folks, right, is especially with Google and one of the things that we're trying to figure out still is making sure that everyone has connectivity, everyone has Wi-Fi. But one of the hacks I tell folks is how do you make sure that your Google Drive is capable of you working without any internet at home or on your way to home or wherever you're at, and then when you come back to what I call civilization, a place with the Wi-Fi, you're capable of saving everything. So instead of me just explaining to you once, I'm going to record myself using a wonderful tool called Screencastify. And there's plenty of tools, right? There's QuickTime, there's Loom, there's whatever that might be. So if I click on record, and I love the component that you can also record your webcam, meaning that you can also model stuff if you need to. And I know this is transparent, but if I didn't have the background, you can also model at the same time. So once again, it's another teaching hack. I click on record. It's going to tell me, okay, Martin, what do you want to record? I'm going to record my screen number 2. I'm going to hit share. And on this component, right, it counts me down. And now I'm going to tell my students, hey guys, what I want you to do is I want you to go to your drive. I want you to click on settings. Under settings, you're going to see this drop down menu. Make sure you click on this little checkbox that says offline. That means you can open and edit any of your Google Docs where you have no connectivity. And when you go back to where there's a place there's Wi-Fi, you'll be able to save all your work. And with that being said, I am now going to stop my video. And what I love about teaching hacks like this, how long did that take me? It took me no less than 45 seconds for me to explain something. Now I can copy, I can send it to my students and whatever learning management system I'm using, whether it's Google Classroom, whether it's Schoology, whether it's Canvas, whatever, Seesaw, whatever that might be. But I love this components where you're able to share to your classroom, publish to YouTube. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time for you to create your YouTube channel. We have YouTube embedded in pretty much everything on your TV. If you haven't bought a refrigerator lately, you can now watch YouTube on some of those monitors on your refrigerator as well. Create a channel for your students to learn at home. Create a channel for your parents, for their siblings to learn at home. So there's a lot more hacks. You'll have the copy of this presentation if you want to learn more. But I always think about hooks, right? What are the different hooks? And the shift has gone from the cycle of learning from our traditional explain, assign, and assess all the way to now have the students explore, have the students explain, have them apply it to new information, right? And there's something out there called multimedia text sets. They go by different names. They go by game boards. They go by templates. But what I love about this is basically, you can do this on Microsoft, you can do this on Google or whatever platform that you use. And basically what it is you link a variety of different resources, because in today's world, most teachers, the biggest jobs that you have now is how do you curate this information, right? How do you curate the information? So in here, you're now, instead of me giving you a lecture, a full, 1 hour lecture, I'm now going to provide you this multimedia text sets where you have the ability to listen, compare, define, explore. In other words, you are exploring a concept. At the very end, you have the students, put their thoughts and questions in here. What I love about this process is I love that it's the students who are taking the time to explore how they want to explore. So you are now differentiating, you're now scaffolding, you're now, using all the tools, what I call the 333 free tools that everybody got in the beginning of March, right? And you develop something like this, like a choice board, right? Show me what you know text set. For me, I was a horrible writer as a kid. So every time my teacher would say, oh, Martin, I need you to write X, Y, and Z, I was like, oh, well, there goes my night, right? I can't watch Battlestar Galactica. I can't watch Knight Rider. And if you know those wonderful programs, I am now dating myself, but that's okay. But basically, when I'm looking at this, right, I'm like, oh, I've heard about Adobe Spark. Oh, teacher, you mean I can show you what I know through Adobe Spark? I'm like, do it to it. Oh, I can do Canva. Yes. Flipgrid. Yeah. Explain everything. Desmos. You show me what you know, right? Because I've done the unfortunate past experience where I told my students, I want everybody to do a PowerPoint, and give me a 10-minute PowerPoint. Oh, good Lord. Have you ever sat through 60 different PowerPoints? I do not recommend it for anyone. So for me, it's like, how do you get everybody, up and running with this? So text sets is one of those components. Where do you find out more information about all these wonderful things? There's, I left you tons of samples here. There's pretty much any tool that you can think of that you are now learning specifically in this conference, you can utilize in using a multimedia text sets, which is a component of something called a hyperdoc. A hyperdoc is a way that you present your lesson, your unit. As you can see in this graphic, there are multiple ways that a hyperdoc helps you in targeting multiple standards at the same times, right? It's like doing a project where there's an inquiry-based project, project learning, whatever that might be. But what I wanted you to see in this hyperdoc, I wanted you to see that, in here, you have the different modalities of what you want your students to do. And those are, of course, engaging, exploring, explaining, applying. And on the right-hand side, these are the tasks. So when I hear teachers like, well, Martin, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out how I'm going to do synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. Bam, here you go. You go to, of course, hyperdoc.co, and you're going to get a multitude of different samples. Ladies and gentlemen, do not reinvent the wheel, right? Just do your mix, do the remix. So the last thing, you know, when people say, well, Martin, it seems like you have like a lot of video in here, right? And with Zoom and all these wonderful technologies, you know, how do I incorporate video? But better yet, how do I even find videos? I always tell people, if you're having a hard time finding videos, if you're not a social media person, ClassHook is one of those wonderful tools, because ClassHook will pretty much look up for those videos for you. Say, for example, if I'm trying to, you know, talk to my kids about erosion, right? I hit search, and what ClassHook does, it goes through, and you can select the grade level if you want, right? So you can elementary, the clip length, the series, standards, you know, whatever. But what I love about it is they can find me videos really, really quick on whatever topic I need. So it makes my planning a lot easier, right? So if you're still using that, you know, that wonderful Welcome Back Carter clip that you have, and if Welcome Back Carter doesn't mean anything to you, that just means exactly what I'm trying to say, is sometimes, you know, our pop culture is not the poppiest. So using tools like this is one of my favorite things to showcase. Anyways, moving along, the last thing I'm going to talk to you about is Edgy Protocols. You know, I keep on hearing about, oh, Martin, I've never taught online. I never taught, you know, blended as well as I should. So Edgy Protocols, edgyprotocols.com is a place where you learn about teaching frames that can be reused daily. Students work in multiple standards. And the best of all, these things can be completed anywhere between 15 minutes to 45 minutes or a little bit longer. But what I love about this is they provide fun ways for students to grapple with content. One of my favorite Edgy Protocols is the one called the Fast and Curious, right? And I love to thank my friend here, History Sandoval. If you haven't followed her on Twitter, please follow her. She just gives out this stuff for free, right? All these Edgy Protocols, and the way she makes them make them look great. But here's the notion, right? She uses quizzes. In quizzes, what she ends up doing is I am going to log in. Oh, of course, this is going to happen. But let me just do it if as I speak. What you end up doing is you find whatever concept that you're trying to work out for the week. You're trying, of course, I'm not going to do that yet. So whatever you're going to try to figure out, maybe it's vocabulary, right? And what happens is you allow the students to play this quiz, this game about vocabulary. You don't tell them what it is. It's just fresh. Let's just see what they know. And you do this for 5 minutes. After 5 minutes, what Quizzes does, and you can use Kahoot, you can use whatever other tool, assessment tool you like. But what I love about these tools now is that you can now automatically see, oh, this is what my students know. And, you know, my class average is about 30%. So what do? You do a mini lesson and you go through all the questions. You then explain. And then guess what? You do the test again. You do the quiz again. And then when you do it, what you're going to see is you're going to see your class average bump up. That's on Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen. Guess what? On Tuesday, you're doing the same thing. But the time Thursday hits, you're now hitting 90% of all the content your students need to know, because they figured out, oh, Mr. Cisneros is not trying to get us. He's now figured out a way to make assessment fun, or make assessment, you know, work for us. And these are just a lot of these small teaching strategies that you'll find out in the Fast and Curious. And these are engagement activities, because the students are creating, they're talking, they're recording themselves, they're making video, they're sketch noting, right? And there's a variety of wonderful tools that, no matter whether you're using a Chromebook, a MacBook, an iPad, you know, whatever it is. What I left here for you are some great spreadsheets that you can see of where does it align for, you know, English language arts. I also left a place for you so you can see it align with mathematical practice, for which Edgy Protocol you might want to use. I know my time is almost up, so the last thing I'm going to tell people is, whatever you do, especially from this conference, is start looking at the tools and start creating a teacher toolkit, right? I call this the modern teacher toolkit. And one of the ones that I have developed over the years is, how do you teach the kids how to read? The internet, right? Because you and I, we grew up learning how to read from these things called analog books, right? Oh, you guys can't see it, but okay, there we go. Anyway, so what I've done here is, you know, with Mercury Reader, it allows me to eliminate all the distractions. Crafty184.com is the Google Chrome extension that allows me to figure out what reading level, you know, that particular part is. If it's too high for my students, then I use one of these tools, either TLDR or Resumer. What it does, it uses artificial intelligence to just chunk that information down. So that way you can chunk chunk information. You can teach kids how to chunk information. Google Translate, one of those wonderful things, especially if they have it on the mobile device where they can automatically translate whatever language, or multiple language, I shouldn't say whatever language, multiple language, you know, right on the fly, right in the very front of your eyes. I show this to parents all the time and their minds are blown, right? We have a huge Mandarin population here. We have a huge Spanish population here. Using stuff like Microsoft Immersive Reader that is now an extension that you can use on whatever, which allows you to have, you know, the text read back to you, show you, translate it for you. Read and write, it's another great tool. But I know my time is up, ladies and gentlemen, and I thank you for your time. If you want to connect with me, like I said, you know, there's a lot of other wonderful things in here, but if you want to connect with me, you can contact me at my website, thetechprofe.com, or you can pretty much find me anywhere on social media at the Tech Profe. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Martin. That was amazing. So the good news is, if you didn't get all that, the slides will be up on we have a download section on the Conference Hub. So we'll put those slides up there. A lot of fantastic tools in there. And I think, I'm glad you mentioned parents as well, because I imagine quite a few parents are really looking for some extra resources to help them out as well as teachers too. So keep the questions coming in the chat box, and I'll turn things over to Elizabeth, and we'll keep the questions coming so we can address any at the end of the presentations. But Elizabeth, take it away.
Thank you so much. That's going to be a tough act to follow. That I learned about a lot of tools, and I thought I knew about a lot of tools. So that was great. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen here in a second. Okay. So I'm gonna, as you saw in the beginning, with Mediasite, and we are a video platform, and I'm gonna give you a little bit of background on what Mediasite does, and then we're gonna sort of delve into some case studies and examples. We do work in K through 12, but more recently, we're getting into the teaching and learning space. Our K through 12 historic usage has been more in like school district training. The platform has been used in those areas, but with the pandemic, the need to really provide a digital learning, a virtual learning, blended learning experience has allowed us to move more heavily into the K through 12 environment. We work with, we're in our 20th year. We started working with the Mediasite platform almost 18 years ago. And we work with corporations, predominantly higher education institutions, public health, across the board. But just a couple of examples of, you know, some of the customers and the data around what Mediasite does. So Mediasite is a video platform, and I think that one of the things that is important to understand is that there are a lot of different tools, and Martin explained there are tons and tons of different tools. What Mediasite allows you to do is to either use tools that we provide or take content that you've created with other tools, but put it into a centrally organized, managed environment, secure the content, run analytics on it, integrate it with your LMS, and so forth. So Mediasite itself has tools that allow you to capture directly from a classroom. So in our higher ed environments, most of our teachers are walking in, utilizing the technology that's in the classroom, and the appliance that's living there is automatically recording audio and video of the presenter along with whatever visuals they're showing. So one of the things that's important to us philosophically is that you're able to capture all of that important content that you're maybe using in the classroom to teach the students. If it's PowerPoint, great, but if you're writing on a whiteboard, if you're showing spreadsheets, whatever the case may be. That content can automatically be captured. We also have tools that allow you to author content. We also have tools that allow you to ingest content from third-party tools that, you know, where you've created video. Once that content is ingested, it goes up into the cloud or it goes to your local servers, and then you can really make it more robust and interactive. The content becomes searchable. We run OCR on it. We run speech to text. really focusing on, extracting a lot of metadata from that information, tying it into closed captioning and so forth, so that it becomes a really robust video library of resources. So one of the things that's unique about Mediasite is we're really focused on capturing and your video as separate sources and packaging it together. So you can see here, we have a video, the presenter is one component, the visual is a separate component. And we have tools that allow you to capture up to 4 different concurrent sources. So depending on, especially when you get into maybe a high school level where you might have, it might be a science class or things like that. You might be using multiple displays and want to have different pieces of information all aggregated within the same area. Tied to what Martin mentioned, we're really focused on the playback experience, allowing the learner to experience at the pace they want. So you have the ability to play back at double speed or half speed, depending. One of the things so Mediasite is used for the first time delivery of content, but it's also used a lot to record content so that they can go review it later. So it's hugely valuable, especially for the students to go back and be able to listen to something again and again. So we give you the variable speed, the closed captioning, other information, all designed, and I don't have a pop-out player here, but the other thing is each of these sources you can prioritize. So you don't have to be looking at them side by side. If you just want to look at the visuals and hear the audio, you can pop that out and it will go that way. So, we have a variety of products and services that allow you to capture content, and hardware that can be installed. We're very much committed to automation and to make it easy. But at the end of the day, you're looking for a lot of different things, one of which is learning outcomes. So all content that's recorded but with Mediasite or uploaded into Mediasite, and I'll talk about this a little bit more. I mean, a lot of our some people like to record a video on their phone, but they want to put it somewhere. They want to have that playback experience. They want to have the analytics. One of the sessions I heard yesterday was focusing on, the learning outcomes. And certainly one of the most challenging things I think you're facing in K through 12 is you already struggle with some students being left behind. And how do you get to that level where they're, are they ready to matriculate to the next grade level? Are they watching the content? Or what are they getting out of it? So a lot of our analytics that we show heat maps. So we show like what portion of a video is watched the most. You can see, and because we tie it all into their authentication, you can get reports that are going to show who's watched it, how long have they watched it, which part of the video did they watch. So if you are really struggling with trying to understand if students are grasping the content, there's a lot of data that you can get from the video when the video is living within the video platform. Probably, I mean, as Martin said, everybody was thrust into this, including the parents, with no prep other than it's March 13th and get to it. That's one of the things that we talk a lot about. There are so many tools like Martin described. And what tools do you use when, and how do you work them all together? One of the things that we spent a lot of time talking with people is there was certainly a big pivot to Zoom. But I think that everybody understands that Zoom's a really amazing tool. We're using it right now, but it's not the tool that could be used across the board. So when do you use web conferencing? When do you use streaming video? When do you use recorded content? How do those things all work together and live within your LMS? So we kind of look at it like there's 3 pillars of virtual learning. There's the web conferencing, where we really need that two-way collaboration. We want to have the dialogue. We want to hear people. But I think we've all sat in, many Zooms where if there are 50 or 100 people, there is no collaboration. Is that the best tool to deliver that content? Or would it have been better to stream that video out and then have time to just let them watch that video produced, pre-recorded, and then have a discussion later, and they could watch it twice, 3 times, and then use the conferencing for that. and then publishing it into the LMS. So, you know, Mediasite in general works with all web conferencing. I have Zoom on this slide and Canvas, but all of our education customers are putting it into any of the course management systems, you know, the Blackboard, Sakai, you know, Brightspace, and then of course in K through 12, you guys are much heavier on Google, but it all operates the same way. It's a you know, an LTI link in. So just a little bit more in terms of some of the differences between web conferencing and streaming. And these resources are all available. I kind of went through this already, but I think that that's one of the things that I think we're seeing heavily in our high customers and increasingly in our K-12 customers. We've had a lot of people that are obviously, like many of you, kind of figuring out what their plan is, and they're realizing that they want to get back into the classroom, but not everybody's going to be in the classroom. There are going to be remote learners, you know, or they need to plan for that. And maybe streaming that class out live is a better method than trying to have the in-person students and also have a web conference, you know, having a video conference going on. Whereas with streaming video and with Mediasite, you could be capturing that live class, streaming it out, but then having a discussion later. So it's all sort of figuring out those different experiences. But along the lines of web conferencing, you know, one of the tools that we offer, and we see this increasingly valuable, is that we have the ability to ingest any Zoom recorded content. And so you can just automatically, if you are doing a video conference with Zoom or other platforms, you can just automatically say, I want this published to my video platform, into my Mediasite, so that it'll automatically go from a Zoom recording to your course file without you having to move it. I think, you know, we're very focused on trying to make that an automated workflow. So an example, a couple that are using Mediasite, like NC State and Ohio State, they have plans to you know, any of the classes that are not going to be delivered in their classrooms, but are going to be delivered by Zoom, they're going to automatically be recording those and publishing them directly into the platform on the back end. So the students have one place to go to see all of their classes and so forth. So I'm just gonna talk a little bit about some of the trends that we saw, just give you a couple examples of what some universities did in the pandemic and how that can maybe translate into some of the things that you guys might be looking to doing going forward. So Villanova University has an important thing about a lot of the colleges and universities, that's something that the K through 12 is now learning. Although not across the board, all universities have already had some sort of distance learning programs in place, you know, that they're maybe monetizing. So they have a little bit more experience in sort of delivering distance content, in addition to doing this lecture capture recording within the classroom as a supplemental tool. So Villanova had a huge library of content. They've been using Mediasite for about 10 years now, maybe more. And they were able, when they shifted to in-person class, they were actually, for some of the classes, able to repurpose older content, especially the ones like maybe in the technical fields where the information was less, you know, was more static. You know, they were able to repurpose old content. They were able to use Zoom and then publish that into Mediasite. They were able to use personal capture tools to create new content. But then they were also able to do some interesting things, because Mediasite does allow for live streaming. They were able to live stream Palm Sunday Mass to 11,000 people. And they were able to do all that within the same platform, which was valuable to them. But they also were able to, because it's all tied into their authentication, their groups, their roles, they were able to track all the data at a fairly granular level. When the pandemic first broke out, Liverpool University in China was one of the first to pivot entirely to online. And they in the first 2 days, they recorded over 2,000 videos with Mediasite that the student viewed nearly 100,000 times. So they immediately were using our personal capture tools, creating content and putting out the content online. So they were never in a classroom, but they were just using it, and then they were able to tie it into the back end. The same, you know, Leeds is another university that was able to pivot because they had a huge online library, and they were able to pivot the content to their remote students. And Cuyahoga Community College in Ohio, they were also able, in 4 weeks, faculty created over 3,000 lecture videos that they were able to deliver out to the students. So I think that, you know, there's a lot of different, I think we're all a bit worried about what's going to happen. Are we going to get back into the classroom? Is it going to be blended? Are we going to be sent back home? So forth and so on. I think that, and I agree, you know, video is probably one of the most important tools that is going to allow the students to continue to learn. And so, you know, you want to give your faculty the tools and the resources to do that, but you also want to give the students a good experience, and you also want to be able to get some analytics on that. And I think that that is something that, you know, I really, you know, these examples are from colleges and universities that have been working with this technology and prepping for several years. So I really commend everybody for what has been accomplished, and it is a really hard challenge. And I think, though, back to what Martin said, we are very focused on automation and ease of use. And that is the most critical thing, both for your faculty and your students. It has to be easy. It has to be seamless. It has to be easy for them to find. You know, most of us are not capable of, you know, trying all these, you know, I think Martin probably has played with all of those cool tools that he showed, but some of us just want one and done, you know, and they want it to be easy and just tell me what to do, tell me where it goes, make sure it's all organized. And I think that that's from a, you know, what you need to focus on. I think that letting people choose is great. And we're very invested in letting people choose whatever tool they want for their personal capture. But at the end of the day, keeping it organized, keeping it managed, and not making it overwhelming in terms of the number of choices that the student and faculty may have would be a recommendation that I have.
Yeah, may I ask a question? And,
yes.
And this is to both of you, actually. So, so the question about FERPA compliance and Zoom came up on the chat. So we talked about this yesterday, Elizabeth. How do you modify the technology to meet the age of the learner? And so maybe I'll start with Elizabeth, and then Martin, I'd love to hear your thoughts from a K-12 perspective. So maybe Elizabeth's thoughts on
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, obviously there's I mean, anybody can watch video, so that's one component, but I think that the biggest challenge is the youngest learners really need a lot more socialization and interaction in the environment. That's a hard thing to manage in a completely virtual environment. I think that that's where you actually need some of the tools that, like in the games and things like that Martin showed, that are much more interactive. I think that in terms of adapting the technology, you know, from the middle school up, I think you can really, they're comfortable using a conference, you know, conferencing tools, streaming tools, and so forth. But I do think that in terms of compliance, you do want to make sure that you're creating, you know, you're establishing, you know, security, you know, groups and roles and all those kinds of things. Yeah. But I think that people learn differently. I think you have to think about this type of environment where they can't process the same amount of content as they would sitting in a seat in a classroom. I feel like you have to create smaller pieces of content if it's going to be online, because it's harder for somebody to sit in a 50-minute, you know, lecture, you know, remote. Whereas if you can parse it up, it becomes more manageable for them.
Yeah, and Martin, I just curious on, you know, coming from the K-12 perspective, how are you modifying that for in your district?
You know, so I always tell folks is, you know, be humble and be a student of your students. That's where you start, right? Figure out what they're into, whatever their grade level is, their age. But I always I think about, I try to learn from, from the components that that no matter what we do, we cannot replicate, on a screen. So I start to think about, well, how do we get our students to engage? Well, like everything else, right? Like your grandma used to tell you, time equals trust. So how do you build that trust in? And for me, it's all, I go back to is, how do I let my students know that I'm thinking about them and I want to engage with them? So I started thinking about, kinesthetic hooks. I started thinking about artistic hooks. And then I started thinking, well, what are some of the, what are some of the features that we have that we can use off the bat? So, I think about, I go back to art, I go back to music, and for me, it's like, well, let's talk about a story. How do I engage with my students? So one of the things that I'm teaching my teachers to do is, you probably all seen them before. About a year or 2 years ago, it was very popular on YouTube. Is these opening videos, right? Where somebody gets a brand new whatever it is. So it's like, oh, what's in the box? And what I teach my teachers is, why don't you do, at the very beginning, do stuff that you get to know one another, right? How do you build culture in the classroom? So I have the kids, grab a box, whatever box, and have them put 3 things in the box that represents them, right? And then we go out and share. So right now, Christine and Elizabeth and Clint, I'm seeing you guys on board, and I can say, okay, pull, without getting up, what's around you? What are 3 different things that you can tell me that represent you? Right? And we can go and share. From there, I would then probably have something like Flipgrid, right? Okay, now, I want you to, so if we don't have time to do everyone, using tools like Flipgrid will allow us, to view everyone, and then we can respond. So my whole thing is, build culture first. What are those tools that build culture? I talk about Flipgrid. I talk about, using sketchnoting, which is, really, really interesting for me because, when I was a kid, I used to love, to draw all the time. And that's how I would take my notes, up until 3rd grade. Miss Higginbotham, if you're still there. She's the one that told me, I think quit messing around and take real notes. But the reality is the research shows that, if we do little doodles and stuff and we see that paper later on, we're going to be able to remember. So once again, I start to think about who's in front of me. I start to think about, what are my students? What are they into? And then I bring in those references. But once again, I try not to talk more than 4 minutes or 5 minutes. I know this is something completely different, but I try not to talk more than 4 and 5 minutes and have students do something, right? And it's like I tell folks, whether you're creating screencasting, whether you want to do direct instruction that way, but whatever you're doing with video, don't go over 4 minutes, because in today's world, I call it the TikTok generation. Anything over 4 or 5 videos is now called a documentary. They're now watching The Irishman, right? So they're watching The Irishman. They're like, what is she talking about? So what I do is I chunk information. How do I show them how to dismantle information? So, whether it's Edpuzzle, right? It's not just sitting down and watching a movie and then you reply later. No, it's watching a movie or a video, and then you ask questions in between. And then I get tools, whether it's read and write, where I can show them how to, instead of them writing feedback, especially for my little ones, or if they're in special ed, how they can voice their feedback to me, and we go back and forth that way. So we one thing we haven't talked about is looking at the accessibility features of all the tools that we're using. That is going to become very, very viable in today's learning, especially for the first few months as we kick off pretty much in distance learning.
Absolutely. And just one, as we only have a couple minutes left, that went so quickly. So maybe Elizabeth, I'll throw this to you. We talked yesterday also about how do you prepare your teachers? So this is a whole new way of teaching. And so you've got experience primarily at higher ed, but also at K-12. Maybe just some kind of summary remarks in terms of how we can help our teachers.
Sure. Yeah, I think, I think in reality, teachers are no different than everybody else. They're in the world, there's about, 10 to 15% are early adopters of some of this technology, and the rest sort of are coming along later, slowly but surely. So I think it's really, the good news from our world is this this forced march to Zoom and for everybody to be online and for everybody to be creating and using video has really accelerated that. Because I think one of the biggest challenges we've all faced prior to pandemic is these are not new tools. It's just these tools weren't necessarily being utilized, and these tools are great tools to also supplement your classroom content. There's no reason that these have to be mutually exclusive, like pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. I mean, the Google Translate, all these different things are great ways to create a more immersive environment, regardless of whether or not we're all sitting in the seats in the classroom. So I think though, so I think the scariness has fortunately, people are less scared. And so now it's really trying to give them training and tools and a comfort level, that they need so that they can feel comfortable. And I do think they need guidance on best practice. I mean, what happened in the spring was just basically everybody use whatever you think is going to be best for you, generally. There were a few standards, but the only thing that was standard was it wasn't standard. And I can, tell that, from just each class my daughter was in. I think now we have to create more continuity. I think the parents are expecting that. I think that, and we need to create more training tools for the faculty to know what that looks like. We need to create more training tools for the parents to know what to expect. And I think we need to create more training tools for the students. I think that even though our students are young and we think they're all tech savvy, I think this was also a great illustration of how there's a lot of discrepancy between how tech savvy one student is and how at a certain grade and how much technology they have accessible to them.
Absolutely, thank you. And the issue just of equity, I think, is so broad. Equity and just not only access to technology, but ability to deliver technology and pedagogical equity, et cetera, et cetera. So thank you so much. A lot of information to absorb. We will get those slides up into the hub. Thank you to our speakers, to Elizabeth, to Martin. Really appreciate your time and sharing all these great ideas. Thank you for those who attended this summit. We still, we're going to keep the hub open a little bit longer so you can get in there, say hi to our sponsors, enter passport to prizes. We'll be doing the drawing later today. And thank you for all you're doing for your school communities. Honestly, I'm just amazed at the heroic efforts here. So Naomi, would you like to take us home?